and then do a little there, a little on the inside. Now, the torn pieces, now here's the 50 grit for the little torn pieces again. Doing that. Again, re-rounding that edge on the top. Then stop and look, see if all the harsh sand marks are out. You're going to continue to have sand marks till you get to the end, but you want to progressively reduce them. Obviously, the coarser the grit, the deeper the sand marks. So as you progress through, you've got progressively shallower and shallower sand marks. Now it's ready for the last sand belt, which would be the 80 grit sand belt. I'll do the same thing with that, and then the pieces of the 80 grit belt pieces for the inside. And I won't do that right now, but I'm going to show you the sequence after that, which is the paper-backed grits. After those 3 grits of sanding belt, I go to the paper-backed grits, and what I do there is I buy the sheets of aluminum oxide sandpaper, a full sheet, and then what I do is I just, the paper side in, fold it in half, like that, and then put it on a table, flat surface, take your steel straight edge again, hold the paper up, force the edge against it so you're right on it, and then with a razor knife, cut it in half. So you've got 2 pieces now. The piece you're working with, you fold that in half, and then half again. And this, what I'm folding right now, is just happens to be a 200 or a 120 grit. And now it's pretty much ready to use, except that when you're sanding with this, you got 4 usable sides. You can do one vase just with one side, another one from the other side. Then when they're used up, reverse it, and you can use the other 2 sides. But when you're sanding one side, the inside's rubbing against each other and could get worn down. So to preclude that, that's what this piece of paper toweling is for. I fold that in half and then half again also. I put it inside the crease of the piece I just folded, like that. And then I take the edges and just tear them away. And then the other edge. So there you've got a little padding. So it not only protects the grit on the inside, but also as this heats up, it again gives a little more insulation from burning your fingers. That single paper towel should be enough to do a second one. And here's the 80 grit. Lay that in there. Pull away any of the excess paper. Doesn't have to be pretty. You've got 2 of them. You're using 3 grits. The third one would be a 220. And what you can do is after you get done with one, you can splurge and use a second piece of paper toweling, or you can just borrow the one from one of the previous grits you used. But now what I would be doing would be, I finished with an 80 grit aluminum oxide sand belt. Now I'm continuing on with a paperback grits, of which is also an 80 grit. So I pick up where I left off with the same 80 grit. You're going to find a paperback is going to give you a smoother sanding than the belt will, because the belts are open coated and a little coarser. It's like a transition. So you use this, again, both inside and out. Go to your 120, and then you're finishing up with your 220 grit. Okay, piece is pretty much ready now. I progressed through the different grits of sandpaper, and this is what it should look like when you get done with your 220 grit, which is normally more than satisfactory for most woods that you're working with. Sometimes it's difficult to find a grit higher than 220 grit unless you got a good specialty store in your area or go through a mail order catalog. But if you're working with some of the denser, harder woods like your ebonies or your rosewoods, sometimes going on even as high as a 600 grit might bring out a much nicer finish to it. But I think in most cases it's overkill, and you'll find that this will look quite satisfactory as it is. So it's ready to be dismounted. Just loosen the nut. Take it off. And now we're ready for our second, or our next sequence. Okay, so we've got our finished sanded piece ready for the next sequence, which is going to be coming up in a second. The first thing I wanted to do is go over, now that we've got the swing plate off here, is go over why I use the toothbrushes. Of course, you saw the end of it I was using for removing excess chips that gotten away from the cutting blades, but also, and it's very important, that's to keep the slide rods and the handle, the screw part, lubricated. So you get a nice smooth operation at all times. If it's binding or getting sticky, you're not going to get as nice a clean a cut. There are dry spray lubricants, silicone lubricants in that. I've tried a lot of them, but I have just much luck with WD-40. So it's easy to obtain, it's inexpensive, and I find it works great. So that's what I'm going to be showing you. But I don't like to spray directly on it. You'll get drips and globs in that. What I like is get an old toothbrush, and you can see this one's been used quite a bit, but still effective. Spray a little bit of WD-40 right on a brush, and then take it and go over the all the parts, the moving parts here, the slide rods and the screw part. And I normally do this when it's bolted back on. It's easier to work. But do all parts of it, and it's ready for your next vase. Nice smooth operation to it. But if it starts getting where it's getting kind of difficult, that's a clue you need to get some WD-40 or some kind of lubricant on there. So always keep that in mind. But that's the reason I got that out. And the reason for that toothbrush, now this toothbrush here is actually when I change blades, if I have to take these out to resharpen them or something, all this sawdust that works inside there, and it's important that these blades set flat and you get a nice straight alignment for an even cut. When these blades are out, before you realign them, set them back in to realign them, take the brush and get in there so it cleans out all that excess sawdust on, so that when the blades do set back in, they're nice and flush. So enough said of that. Let's get on with finishing our piece here. The old towel. I just take any old cotton towel, nice fluffy one preferably, and I fold it in half and just use it as like kind of a cushioning pad. This is going to be turned upside down now. I don't want to roughen up the nice smooth edge on the top here. And what we're going to do is now get a finish sander. At least that's my choice of doing it. You can sand it any way that's you feel works best for you. But I'll take it here with a finish sander, and this is a 120 grit paper I've got on here. And I'll sand it again for 4 sides. So there you've got a nice sanded, smooth surface there. I do 4 sides again so that I don't get it uneven. And if you notice, I didn't do a lot of rocking the sanding, finishing sander back and forth. You'll tend to round the edges that way. You'll get a high spot in the middle so that when you set it down, you don't want a vase that rocks on you. You want it to set nice and flat and level. So we got a nice sanded finish on the base of it. Next thing to do is pick a side and get your piece signed. Give it that personal effect. I recommend you get down with a pencil and paper and just do a lot of practice and decide how you're going to do your signature to make it distinctive. Mine has always been my first initial and last name, and I do it in almost like a print script. It's kind of a combination, just something the artsy effect. Some people do it longhand with script writing. Some do it just printed. Some people just use letters. Some use nicknames. Some use first name and last initial. Any way you want. I just put L. L. Cheney on it. Okay, and I just happen to like these little Sharpie permanent markers. It's black. You'll find it's very important to get the ultra fine points, not the very fine points, not the fine points. They're too fat. And you get a big clumsy looking signature. You want a nice delicate signature that's still legible. The very last thing is the wood plugs. Pick out a wood plug. These are kinds you can get in regular hardware store. They're called half-inch flathead tapered wood plugs. They're tapered inwards so that the front part of it goes into the vase. The top part is actually wedged above it, and then you've got to hammer it in. But you get a nice tight fit. You won't have to glue it. The material is usually birch that they make these out of, and it's going to contrast with whatever material more than likely that you're using on your vase. But I don't really get too concerned about that. It's the bottom of the vase. You just gently whack that piece in there. And that'll never come out unless you take it out. And the only way of really getting that out is to get a half-inch dowel, stick it from the inside with a hammer, and pop it out. But now you've got your piece plugged up. The last thing I do, now as my personal trademark, I now drill a 3/4 inch hole centered over the dowel and glue a penny in there, and that's my trademark to show the year I make it. And I don't even mind someone doing that as long as they don't do it at a professional level. If they're making it for gifts or ideally for weddings, it shows the year that the wedding was, it's great. But another suitable way is just use that light dowel to date it. So I got my signature, and then on the dowel, or on the flat wood plug, I'll put parentheses 97. So it's almost like gives that another functional purpose there. The piece is done, and you got to admit that is one beautiful piece, and it doesn't even have a finish yet. I leave that up to you. You can use whatever your favorite finish is, whether it be an oil, a polyurethane, shellac, lacquer. We have our vase here. This is the one we just finished. Actually, I say vase. This is now a vase. And what we want to do is see what it's going to look like when embellished with an arrangement of some sort, whether it be dried flowers, whatever you're choosing. One thing I make that's kind of a personal touch that I use at fine art shows is cattails that I make out of a combination of birch doweling, sawdust, and wood strips. And I'd like to show you what this can look like with that. First of all, what I'm going to do, or first of all, is put some sand in it. And I buy sand commercially. It's play sand that you get for children's play boxes, but it's nice and coarse and white and clean. And I just fill it up to about the middle of the neck with the sand. And then these are what I make. I make cattails, and because they're smaller than normal cattails, as a trade name, I call them Kitten Tails. And they seem to go very well. They're received very well at the art shows. As a matter of fact, when I run out of them, the sale of the vases drops off considerably. So this is something that my wife and I consider a necessary evil. They're difficult to make, very time-consuming, but they work great. I make them extra long. Now, for this size vase, we want to shorten them.